rejection that shook the NBA, the Sacramento Kings just did something nobody expected from them. They looked at Ja Morant, a former superstar, a former face of the league, a human highlight reel who once had the NBA in the palm of his hand, and they said no. Not maybe, not wait and see, not let's keep talking. No. And that one word may have changed the entire direction of two franchises. For months, the rumor was sitting there like a loaded question. Sacramento needed a point guard. Memphis had one. It seemed ready to move. Ja Morant wanted a new situation. The Kings had been searching for a new identity ever since the De'Aaron Fox era ended. On paper, it looked simple. A desperate team, a famous star, a chance to grab headlines overnight. But this time, Sacramento did not blink. According to the reports around the league, the Kings were only willing to seriously consider Morant if Memphis attached draft capital. Think about how wild that sounds. We are talking about Ja Morant, a two-time All-Star, a player who once made every fast break feel like an emergency alert. And Sacramento's position was basically this: if you want us to take the risk, you need to pay us. That is not how stars are usually treated. That is how the league talks about danger. The Grizzlies did not want to attach picks. The Kings did not want to surrender their future. And once Sacramento used the 7th pick on Darius Acuff Jr., the message became impossible to miss. The Kings were done chasing the old version of Ja Morant. They were choosing a 9-year-old guard with fresh legs, fresh confidence, and no storm following him into the building. That is what makes this story bigger than a failed trade rumor. This is not just about Sacramento passing on Morant. This is about a franchise finally refusing to repeat the same mistakes that haunted them for years. They already watched Tyrese Halliburton leave and become a star somewhere else. They already watched De'Aaron Fox walk into a new chapter while Sacramento kept searching for answers. They already know what panic decisions can cost. So when Ja Morant's name appeared, the old Kings might have jumped. The new Kings held the line. And now the entire NBA is asking the same question. If even Sacramento, a team badly needing a point guard, would not take Ja Morant without extra compensation, how far has his value really fallen? Before we go deeper, tell me where you are watching from right now. If you think the Kings made the right decision by choosing Darius Acuff Jr., comment 1. If you think they should have taken the gamble on Ja Morant, comment 2. And if you love NBA drama, trade rumors, and stories the league does not want to say out loud, make sure you subscribe, because this story is only getting darker from here. The deal that fell apart. The strangest part about the Ja Morant situation is not that Sacramento walked away. It is how fast the entire conversation collapsed once the Kings made their real position clear. Because this was never a normal star trade negotiation. Usually, when a player with Morant's resume becomes available, teams start building packages around picks, young players, salary matching, and hope. They convince themselves the upside is worth the chaos. They imagine the highlights, the jersey sales, the national TV games, the arena suddenly feeling alive again. But Sacramento looked at the same player and saw something different. They saw the contract, they saw the injuries, they saw the missed games, they saw the public tension in Memphis, they saw the risk of handing the keys to a player whose own franchise seemed ready to move on. And instead of acting desperate, the Kings flipped the pressure back onto the Grizzlies. If you want us to take Ja Morant, then you need to give us something with him. That sentence changed everything. Memphis did not want to attach draft capital. The Grizzlies still believed Morant's name carried value. They still believed another team would look at the talent, ignore the noise, and convince itself that a fresh start could fix everything. But Sacramento was not buying the fantasy without protection. That was the standoff. Two teams, both with problems, both needing a solution, but neither willing to be the one that looked desperate. For Memphis, attaching a pick would be an admission that Morant had become a negative value asset. For Sacramento, giving up assets for him would be a return to the kind of reckless thinking that had hurt the franchise before. So the talks stalled, then faded, then died completely once the draft arrived. And when the Kings selected Darius Acuff Jr. at number 7, it was more than a draft pick. It was a public answer. Sacramento did not need to release a statement. They did not need to say they were out. They did not need to explain their position to the league. The pick said everything. They chose youth over risk. They chose control over chaos. They chose a player they could mold instead of a star they would have to repair. And for Morant, that had to sting. Because once Sacramento stepped away, the market around him looked smaller, quieter, and colder than anyone expected. The star Ja Morant used to be. To understand why this rejection hit so hard, you have to remember who Ja Morant used to be. Not the trade rumor, not the contract problem, not the player teams are now studying with caution. The real Ja Morant, the one who exploded into the NBA like someone had dropped lightning into a basketball jersey. When Morant came out of Murray State, he was not supposed to become one of the league's most terrifying attractions this fast. He was skinny, fearless, explosive, and completely unpredictable. Every possession felt like something impossible might happen. 1 second he was standing at the top of the key, the next he was flying through traffic like gravity had lost its authority. He won Rookie of the Year, then he kept climbing. He became an all-star. He became the engine of a young Memphis team that played with swagger, speed, and attitude. For a while, the Grizzlies looked like the next great problem in the Western Conference. They were young, they were loud, they were dangerous, and Morant was the face of all of it. At his peak, he was not just putting up numbers, he was creating moments. The twisting layups, the violent finishes, the full court bursts that made defenders backpedal in panic, the confidence, the stare downs, the energy that made Memphis feel like more than a rebuilding team. Morant made the Grizzlies feel important. He gave them identity. He made people believe that a small market franchise could build something loud enough for the whole league to hear. That is why this fall feels so shocking, because the NBA does not easily forget what it saw. It remembers the highlights, it remembers the playoff battles. It remembers the nights when Morant looked like the fastest man alive with a basketball in his hand. That memory is what keeps teams tempted, even now. But memories are not contracts. Memories do not play 82 games. Memories do not protect a locker room from uncertainty, and that is where the problem begins. The Ja Morant Sacramento was evaluating was not the same clean, unstoppable star Memphis once built around. He was still talented, still dangerous, still capable of making a crowd lose its mind, but he came with questions now. Real questions. Expensive questions. Questions that no highlight reel could erase. That gap between what he was and what he is now became the center of the entire trade market. The fall nobody wanted to watch. Nobody wanted Ja Morant's story to turn into this. Not Memphis, not the league. Not the fans who watched him become one of the most electric guards of his generation. Because when a player rises that fast, people do not expect the fall to come before the prime. They expect growth. They expect maturity. They expect the superstar version to get sharper, calmer, and more complete. Instead, Morant's last few years became a maze of missed games, injuries, suspensions, frustration, and declining trust. That is the part teams cannot ignore. It is one thing for a star to have a bad season. It is another thing when the concerns start stacking on top of each other. A shoulder injury here, an ankle problem there, calf soreness, elbow issues, longue absence. A body that plays with breathtaking force but seems to pay a price for that violence every season. Then came the questions about availability. For a franchise player making superstar money, being special is not enough. He has to be present. He has to be dependable. He has to be there when the season turns cold, when the standings tighten, when the locker room needs its leader. And Morant, for too many stretches, simply was not on the floor. Then came the efficiency drop. The player who once tore defenses apart started looking less explosive, less efficient, less automatic. The shooting numbers raised alarms. The player efficiency decline became harder to explain away. Every missed game and every rough performance made front offices ask the same uncomfortable question. Are we trading for the star he used to be or the uncertainty he has become? And then there were the public issues. The suspensions damaged more than his schedule. They damaged trust. They changed how teams talked about him behind closed doors. They made executives think beyond basketball. Could he lead a young locker room? Could he stay focused? Could he avoid distractions? Could he accept coaching when things got difficult? That is why Sacramento hesitated, because this was not just about whether Ja Morant could still score. Everyone knows he can still create chaos when he is healthy and locked in. The real question was whether the Kings could afford to bring that entire package into a franchise already trying to rebuild its culture. And in the end, their answer was clear. Talent was not enough. Memphis reaches the breaking point. The relationship between Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies did not fall apart in one night. It cracked slowly. First, there was frustration, then silence, then public tension, then the feeling that both sides were still in the same building but no longer walking toward the same future. For years, Memphis gave Morant everything a franchise can give, a young star. They drafted him, they built around him, they handed him the ball, the offense, the identity, and the responsibility of carrying a city that wanted to believe. And for a while, it worked. The Grizzlies were young, fearless, and impossible to ignore. But when the injuries came, when the suspensions came, when the team started sliding, that same foundation began to shake. The coaching tension became one of the clearest warning signs. After a frustrating loss, Morant's answers to the media pointed attention back toward the coaching staff. That may sound small, but in the NBA, small cracks become loud when the star player is involved. A short answer becomes a headline. A deflected question becomes a signal. A quiet bench moment becomes a national debate. Inside a struggling team, that matters. A franchise can survive losing games. It can survive injuries. It can survive trade rumors. But once trust between a star and the organization starts to fade, every single problem becomes harder to manage. Every loss feels heavier. Every quote gets studied. Every report adds another layer of pressure. And Memphis was already changing around it. The old core was no longer stable. The Grizzlies began moving pieces, shifting toward a new timeline, looking at younger players, and quietly preparing for life after the version of Morant they once believed would define the next decade. The team that once looked built around him started looking like a team trying to move past him. That is when the situation became bigger than basketball. Morant reportedly felt done with Memphis. Memphis seemed ready for a fresh start. But the league did not rush to rescue either side. That is the brutal truth of the modern NBA. A star can want out, and a team can want to move him, but if the contract, health, and reputation do not line up, the market can freeze. That is what happened here. Memphis reached the point where moving Morant made sense emotionally and strategically, but by the time they got there, his value had already changed. And Sacramento saw that clearly. Sacramento's painful history at point guard. The reason Sacramento's decision matters so much is because this franchise knows what it feels like to get the point guard position wrong. They have lived it for years. The Kings had talent. Real talent. The kind of guards teams spent entire rebuilds trying to find. Tyrese Halliburton was there. De'Aaron Fox was there. Different players, different styles, different timelines, but both had the kind of ability that can shape a franchise. And Sacramento let both eras end. Halliburton left and became the kind of guard every modern offense wants. Smart, efficient, creative, unselfish, and dangerous without needing to dominate every possession. Then Fox left and found a new chapter somewhere else, reminding Kings fans how painful it can be to watch a former face of the franchise succeed in another uniform. That history matters because it changed the emotional weight of the Morant decision. The old Sacramento might have panicked. The old Sacramento might have seen Morant. That is how desperate franchises talk themselves into expensive mistakes. But this version of the Kings had already paid the price for impatience. They knew what it meant to lose young guards. They knew what it meant to chase relevance instead of building stability. They knew what it meant to make a move that looks exciting on the day it happens, but becomes painful when the future arrives. That is why the front office had to be careful. Bringing in Morant could have created headlines. It could have made Sacramento feel relevant overnight. It could have given the fan base something loud to argue about. But would it have solved the deeper problem? Would it have created a stable direction? Would it have helped the young roster grow? Would it have protected the next 5 years? Those are the questions Scott Perry had to answer. And the answer was not emotional. It was strategic. Sacramento had to stop acting like a team that needed to win the news cycle. They had to start acting like a team that needed to win the future. That means protecting picks. Protecting cap flexibility, protecting the locker room, protecting the young core from being swallowed by another high-risk shortcut. For once, the Kings did not chase the shiny name. They remembered the pain, and they chose discipline. Scott Perry draws a new line. Every struggling franchise eventually reaches a moment where it has to decide what kind of organization it wants to be. For Sacramento, that moment arrived with Ja Morant's name on the table. Scott Perry could have done what previous versions of the Kings might have done. He could have chased the biggest name available. He could have sold the fan base on star power. He could have told everyone that Morant just needed a fresh start, that Sacramento could be the place where the old Ja came back. That risk is part of winning. Instead, he did something far more difficult. He waited. He evaluated. He said no unless the terms made sense. That is how serious front offices operate. They do not get hypnotized by names. They do not let pressure from social media decide their future. They do not act like every famous player is automatically a solution. They study the full picture: salary, health, age, fit, personality, timeline, leadership, and opportunity cost. And when Sacramento studied the full Morant picture, the warning signs were too loud to ignore. This is what makes Perry's decision so important. He was not rejecting talent. He was rejecting instability. He was rejecting the idea that the Kings had to take someone else's problem just because that problem used to be a superstar. He was rejecting the old Sacramento habit of moving too fast and thinking too late. That kind of restraint is not flashy, but it can save a franchise. The Kings needed a point guard, yes, but they also needed a plan. And those two needs are not the same thing. A point guard can help you win games. A plan can help you build an era. Sacramento had spent too many years confusing movement with progress. This time, Perry seemed determined not to make that mistake. By demanding draft capital, the Kings made their evaluation clear. If Memphis wanted them to take the risk, Sacramento needed protection. If Memphis still believed Morant was a premium asset, then the Grizzlies had to find another team willing to pay like he was one. That team was not Sacramento. The Kings were finally acting like a franchise with self-respect in negotiations. Not desperate, not reckless, not trying to impress the league with a big headline. Just calm, just firm, just unwilling to sacrifice tomorrow for a maybe. Darius Acuff Jr. becomes the new bet. When Sacramento selected Darius Acuff Jr. with the 7th pick, the Kings did not just draft a player, they drafted a direction. Acuff represents everything the Morant trade did not. He is young, he is inexpensive compared to a max contract veteran, he fits the timeline, he gives the coaching staff a chance to build habits from the ground up instead of trying to repair habits formed somewhere else. Most importantly, he arrives without the emotional baggage of a broken relationship with another franchise. That matters, because Sacramento does not need more confusion, it needs clarity. Acuff brings that clarity. He is the new guard, the new project, the new face fans can argue about, hope for, criticize, defend, and eventually believe in. He is not perfect. No rookie guard is. There will be turnovers. There will be defensive mistakes. There will be nights when the speed of the NBA looks different from anything he saw in college. But the upside is real. At Arkansas, Acuff showed the kind of offensive confidence that makes scouts lean forward. He could score, create, attack, pass, and carry responsibility at an age when most players are still learning how to survive. Leading a major conference in scoring and assists is not normal. Doing it as a freshman makes it impossible to ignore. That is why Sacramento saw more than a prospect. They saw a potential answer, and Acuff's attitude only made the bet more interesting. He did not walk into Sacramento sounding afraid. He talked about fitting in, he talked about joining a pack, he talked about pressure, like it was just noise outside the gym. That type of confidence can be dangerous if it is empty, but powerful if it is backed by work. For the Kings, the hope is that Acuff becomes the guard they finally keep, not another young star who blossoms somewhere else. Not another chapter of regret, not another name fans bring up years later with bitterness. This time, Sacramento wants the story to stay in Sacramento. That is why the comparison between Acuff and Morant is so dramatic. Morant is the proven star with questions. Acuff is the unproven kid with possibility. One represents what the Kings could have chased. The other represents what they are trying to become. And for a franchise desperate to escape its own past, possibility was enough. What this means for the rest of the NBA. Sacramento walking away from Ja Morant did not only affect Sacramento, it changed the temperature of the entire trade market, because every front office in the NBA watches these situations carefully. When one team that clearly needs a point guard refuses to pay for Morant, other teams notice. When that same team asks for draft compensation just to take him, other general managers start recalculating. When Sacramento drafts a rookie instead of chasing a former All-Star, the message travels fast. Morant's market is not what it used to be. That does not mean nobody wants him. Talent always has a market. There will always be a coach who believes he can reach the player. There will always be a front office that sees the highlights and imagines a comeback. There will always be a team willing to talk itself into upside if the price drops low enough. But that last part is the key. If the price drops, Morant is no longer being discussed like an untouchable franchise savior. He is being discussed like a complicated investment. A team trading for him would not just be acquiring a point guard. It would be taking on salary, medical risk, public pressure, locker room responsibility, and the challenge of helping him rebuild trust. That is a lot for any franchise. For Memphis, Sacramento's exit makes everything harder. The Grizzlies lose one of the cleaner possible trade partners. They lose leverage. They lose the ability to create the feeling of a wide market. If only a few teams are seriously involved, Memphis may have to lower expectations or wait longer than it wants. And waiting has its own danger. The longer Morant stays in Memphis while everyone knows the relationship is damaged, the more uncomfortable the situation becomes. Every workout becomes a question. Every interview becomes a test. Every report about possible destinations becomes another reminder that both sides may be ready to move on but cannot find the right exit. For the rest of the league, the decision is simple but brutal. Do you bet on the talent or do you respect the warning signs? That is the Morant dilemma now. He could still become one of the league's most exciting comeback stories. A new team, a full offseason, a better environment, and a healthier body could change everything. But the team that makes that bet has to be ready for everything that comes with it. Sacramento decided it was not ready, and that may make other teams wonder if they should be careful too. The lesson behind the no. In the end, Sacramento's decision was never just about Ja Morant. It was about identity. For years, the Kings were a franchise people expected to panic. A team that could be pressured into a risky deal. A team that might chase a famous name because the present felt too painful and the future felt too far away. That reputation does not disappear overnight. It disappears through decision. This was one of those decisions. By passing on Morant and choosing Darius Acuff Jr., Sacramento sent a message to its own locker room, its fans, and the rest of the NBA. The Kings are no longer trying to buy a shortcut. They are trying to build something that can last. That means accepting patience. It means accepting development. It means understanding that a young team may lose before it learns how to win. That is not easy, but it is honest. Morant's side of the story is more complicated, and it deserves humanity. He is not finished. He is not just a headline. He is a gifted player who has made mistakes, dealt with injuries, lost trust, and now faces one of the most important crossroads of his career. The league can be harsh, but growth is still possible. A player can mature. A reputation can be rebuilt. A career can turn if the person is willing to do the work every day, quietly, consistently, without blaming the world for every consequence. That is the lesson for Morant. Talent opens doors, but character keeps them open. Highlights create fame, but reliability creates trust. And in the NBA, trust is everything. A team needs to know its star will be available, accountable, and committed when the season gets hard. For Sacramento, the lesson is different. Do not let fear control the rebuild. Do not let past mistakes force another mistake. Do not chase a name just because the fan base is tired of waiting. Build the right way, protect the young core, support Acuff, surround him with veterans who teach instead of distract, and give the new era enough time to breathe. Peace matters in a locker room, stability matters, respect matters. Not every problem has to be solved with a blockbuster trade. Sometimes the strongest move a franchise can make is the one it refuses to make. So now the road splits. Ja Morant has to rebuild his value wherever he plays next. Memphis has to find a clean path forward, and Sacramento has to prove that saying no was only the beginning, not the victory itself. If you believe the Kings made the right call by choosing patience over risk, hit like, share this video with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more stories behind the biggest moves in basketball. Comment 1 if Sacramento made the smart move, comment 2 if Ja Morant still deserves a major gamble, and comment where you are watching from right now, because this NBA story is far from over.